Ladies and gentlemen, there's a man who does a wonderful Q&A. And for your treat today, I'm delighted to have with us a second Prime Minister, Taoiseach Enda, who's travelled all the way from Ireland to be with us. He too will make some comments. He'll do a Q&A. And please, again, introduce yourselves when it comes to that. But to Taoiseach Enda, Céad Míle Fáilte.
Welcome. Thank you. That means thank you. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be with you today as the CBI celebrates 50 years of championing the cause of British business, and as you look ahead to Britain's economic future in a fast-changing world. I come here, privileged to do so, at a time when the Irish economy is recovering. We are restoring the public finances, rebuilding a broken banking system, and creating an attractive environment in which to create jobs. We are now, in fact, budgeting for growth. Last year, Ireland was the fastest growing economy in the European Union. The European Commission forecasts a repeat of that performance again this year. We had GDP growth of 5.2% in 2014, our strongest annual growth since 2007. Export growth at 12.1% was the strongest since 2001. We will reduce the government budget deficit from a peak of 12.5% of GDP in 2011 to an expected 1.2% next year. We will eliminate that deficit by 2018 and deliver a balanced budget. Unemployment was at a 6-year low of 9.3% in October, down from a high of over 15% back in 2012. Our recovery plan involved a strategy and decisions that have been very painful, to put it mildly, for the people of our country. The people displayed a great patience, great character, and great resilience during the crisis. It's because of their sacrifices and their hard work that our country is moving forward and recovering. So we continue to focus on avoiding the mistakes of the past and the future, because we will not have a return to boom and bust. And this can only be achieved by stability from a government that continues to make the right choices, one that ensures that the hard-won recovery is in sustainable sectors and is balanced regionally and socially. So, if you like, Ireland's recovery is good news for Britain. Ireland and the UK share a mutually beneficial trading partnership. Approximately €1 billion, 1,000 million of goods and services are traded between our two countries every week. This is not one-way traffic. The United Kingdom exports more to Ireland than it does to China, India, and Brazil combined. In fact, we are the 5th largest market of the UK. More than £14 billion worth of British goods and services were exported to Ireland in 2012. We buy more British food and non-alcoholic drinks than any other country, over £3 billion annually. And that level of trade translates into jobs, translates into good jobs. It's estimated that over 200,000 jobs in the UK are predicated on the basis of trade and exports into Ireland. We also invest in each other more than you might think. There are almost 100 UK companies based in Ireland that are backed by the inward investment agency that we used, called the IDA, the Industrial Development Authority. These employ just over 7,000 people. The UK is the 3rd largest investor in Ireland after the United States and Germany. Our people, obviously, move very easily and more easily and frequently across national boundaries. and our respective labour markets have always been very closely integrated. The profile of Irish workers in Britain has changed utterly over many years, reflecting the new economy and, if you like, our tech-savvy professional workforce. There are an estimated 45,000 Irish directors of UK companies at the moment. Great Britain is now the largest single market for tourism and the hospitality sector to the island of Ireland, delivering almost 50% of all overseas visitors and about 1/3 of all overseas tourism revenue. Speaks for itself. The Dublin-London air route is the second busiest international corridor in the world, with 3.6 million passengers travelling between London and Dublin in 2013. Now, given the breadth and the depth of these overlapping interests, it's certainly not surprising that Ireland regards the prospect of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union as a major strategic risk. In truth, the full risks are unknown, as much would depend upon the process and the detail of what a Brexit process would actually look like. However, it's an outcome that the Irish government does not wish to see materialise in the first place. Ireland's commitment to the European Union is clear and unqualified. And clearly the choice of whether to remain in the European Union or to leave it is a matter entirely for the British electorate and for the British people to make. I fully accept and I understand that the decision will be made on the basis of economic impact and on other jurisdictions. It will be made for many reasons, not just for economic impact. I think it's right, as your friend and closest neighbour, and the only EU partner with whom Britain has movement of people across a border every day, to share our perspective with you. The Irish government's strong view, backed up by independent economic research published last week, is that a Brexit is not in Ireland's economic interest. The research showed clearly adverse impact across a range of headings, including trade, energy security, and the labour market. It also debunked the myth that there would be some foreign direct investment bonanza for Ireland if Britain were to leave the European Union. The research also found that Northern Ireland could be the most adversely affected region in the UK in the event of Britain leaving the Union. This would be and is extremely worrying on a number of levels. The EU has been an important, if underestimated, enabler of peace in Northern Ireland. It was instrumental in facilitating constructive contact and in building trust between our governments to find a political settlement. Discussions with the Prime Minister later in the afternoon about this also. All-Ireland economic cooperation is so much easier between two members of the European Union. The EU provided almost €2.4 billion funds over the period 2007 to 2013 to help Northern Ireland to overcome the challenges of a peripheral region that has emerged and is emerging from past conflict. Common membership of the European Union project, if you like, is part of that glue that holds that fragile transition process together. So we've come through a few difficult months politically in Northern Ireland, but I remain optimistic that a conclusion, an agreed conclusion to the talks currently ongoing can be dealt with in the near future. I believe that Northern Ireland can leave the past behind, can become a dynamic economy that will benefit not only the UK, but the island entity of Ireland in an economic sense. In Cambridge in September, I set out my vision for an Ireland which would be defined by optimism, by hope, and by opportunity. And at the very heart of that vision, are efficient, effective, and representative devolved institutions working for the common good on a sustainable basis. There must also be cooperation to build the island economy through overseas investment, trade, tourism, and utilising a competitive common corporation tax rate. Now is not the time to weaken the cohesive and the stabilising influence and the outward focus that shared European Union membership brings to Northern Ireland. Let me say a few words about working with Britain in the European Union. I've no doubt from what I've said that continued membership by Britain of the European Union is good for Ireland and, as a consequence, good for the relationships between our two countries, which have never been closer and never been stronger. Moreover, I believe that continued British membership of the Union is in Britain's own best interest, but that is a matter for the British people to decide upon. The case for that position is being made effectively here by groups and by individuals directly involved in these issues as they affect your country. The stakes are far too high for the voice of business not to be heard in this debate. Absolutely essential that your voice be heard. The CBI's own report, Choosing Our Future, comprehensively analyses the benefits of EU membership and identifies areas which need to be reformed. Your analysis is similar to that of IBEC, your Irish counterpart. IBEC is also strongly positive, but not uncritical, about EU membership. They have in the past played an active part in referendum debates in Ireland on EU treaties that had to be voted upon. So I know that CBI and IBEC have a strong tradition of working together through the Joint Business Council going back for many years. Indeed, I shared a platform in Belfast with your esteemed outgoing Director General, John Cridland, at a conference on the all-island economy earlier this year. And I know that and hope that this collaboration will be useful, obviously, in the months ahead. So let me be clear about this. I haven't come here to your conference to say that the European Union is perfect in every way. Like David Cameron, I've been attending European councils now for several years, and I've seen the European Union up close. I've seen the workings of the European Union up close. But I do still find, an enduring power in the idea that working together we can and are stronger. And the bottom line is still this, that for over 60 years, the European Union has contributed hugely to the healing of a broken and a divided continent. But I've also seen how the European Union could do better. I know that it has been subject to unprecedented challenges in recent times, and I share the view that we need to look critically at what we do at EU level and how we do it to ensure the best deal for all our citizens, because it is in the interests of everybody to make the union of which we are members function more effectively. Now, it's already moving in that direction. Last year, the European Council agreed a strategic agenda which focuses on three things: on growth, on competitiveness, and on jobs. The Council agreed that the Union needs to concentrate on issues where it can make a real difference, leaving member states to do what they can do better. However, delivering on what has been agreed now has to be the focus. And similarly, the Commission has drastically reduced its number of legislative proposals, and it now subjects existing legislation to far more intense scrutiny and scrapping or amending wherever appropriate, if that be necessary. I believe, therefore, that the Union and its institutions are now listening and pointing in the right direction. Let me say a word about Ireland and the European Union. Our economic policy priorities within the European Union are very similar to the UK and to other outward-looking, open and liberal partners. There are, of course, some important differences, including our support for a modern, efficient and suitably funded common agricultural policy so important to our economic profile. And our adoption and unquestioned commitment to the euro as our currency is another. In the middle of the recession, the greatest and unprecedented scale of economic catastrophe facing Ireland, people voted 60-40 in favour of the Fiscal Stability Treaty, linking their future to the euro, the Eurozone and the European Union. But like the UK, we're focused on strengthening and completing the single market, on building a real digital single market, and on expanding the Union's network of trade relationships across the globe. I've spoken to Prime Minister on many occasions about this. We've had the start of even closer cooperation in joint trade missions to locations around the world. I believe that the single market provides a critically important framework for the free flow of goods, of services and of capital. Next year's 30th anniversary will mark an enormous achievement. However, clearly, there's a great deal of work still to be done, especially with regard to services. And I commend the CBI for having rightly again highlighted the digital single market in its analysis. If we get this right, Peter, this will become a key driver of stronger economic growth across Europe. Clearly, borders have been removed in so many ways, and yet the digital obstacles still remain. We've got to deal with this. So in advance of the June Council meeting, I proposed to Prime Minister Cameron and to other leaders that we send a joint letter to President Tusk and President Juncker. That letter highlighted the need for investment, for innovation and for entrepreneurship. 8 countries co-signed the letter and others have since indicated their support for it. The Union provides a vehicle to, if you like, amplify our individual voices, including through the negotiation of trade and investment deals with major global partners, carrying with it, indeed, the opportunity to set down conditions for world trade for many years to come. So quite simply, collectively, we can do far more in this area, given the overall scale of the European economy, than we can on our own. In 2015 and the years ahead, we have become far more interdependent and far more interconnected than ever previously. The progress of the negotiations on the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP, with the US is of critical importance, and that needs to be concluded before American domestic politics begin to take over in terms of the forthcoming presidential elections. So Ireland and the UK are particularly well positioned to make gains from this agreement. Looking at the 3 areas of policy, single market, digital single market, and trade agreements, it's very clear that ongoing cooperation between the UK and Ireland will be of considerable importance. So we, and indeed other partners, want to continue working with the UK, a UK that is committed to staying around and to fighting its corner. So, in terms of the context of the EU reform agenda, well, you heard Prime Minister speak just a few minutes ago. He's making a speech tomorrow, delivering the letter that he has promised to President Tusk, which will set out, in much greater detail what it is that the UK government want in respect of the British reform agenda. The Prime Minister's personal engagement with his opposite numbers has been very well received. He's been around to them all. And there is a lot of goodwill, I have to say, to assist him in making the case for Britain in the European Union. I've always been very clear that Ireland, my country, will be open and pragmatic when it comes to sensible propositions to improve the workings of the European Union. and why not? In general, where the UK seeks reasonable and achievable adjustments, we will be both sympathetic and supportive. It is clear that on the competitiveness agenda, we have a great deal in common. I know that the CBI is interested in the relationship between the majority of member states which are in the euro area and the minority of states which are not. Of course, the euro area has to have the capacity to do what is necessary to ensure financial stability and economic growth. It must act for the single market, but also with full respect for the integrity of the European Union as a whole, without prejudice to the interests of any member state. It's important to note that. We appreciate the concerns of the United Kingdom and other non-euro countries, and in this area we will look very carefully and constructively at whatever is proposed. So in advance of those detailed proposals, it's difficult to be definitive on the other questions which have been raised. However, I believe it should be possible, although sometimes not easy, to reach agreed and reasonable outcomes across the board. In my period as Taoiseach attending the European Council meetings, it's always been possible to achieve a working compromise, irrespective of the contradictions that might be there when the initial proposals are tabled. Now, looking ahead, relationships on these islands have never been better. They've been transformed over the last number of years beyond all recognition. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's state visit was warmly received in Ireland as a historically significant moment of reconciliation. And she worked exceptionally hard to make that historic visit truly momentous, which it was. And our own President Higgins's state visit to Britain last year underscored the maturity of relations between our two countries. The Prime Minister and I remain deeply committed to continuing to work on those relations, to continue to deepen those relationships between our two governments. Back in March of 2012, we signed a joint statement which set out our vision of what closer cooperation would look like over the next period of 10 years. And it also mapped out a structured process of engagement and policy outcomes, part of which is the reason I have the opportunity to go to Downing Street later in the afternoon. So, as we acknowledge our shared past, so too must we look to a shared future. The precise shape of which, as we stand here at the CBI conference, is somewhat unclear. What is clear is that we are closer than ever and working better together for all the peoples of these islands. And I believe that we need to continue that work, our two countries together within the European Union. But it is a matter, ultimately, for the British people. Thank you. Yeah, sure. We've got a few questions. Okay, 5.
Hello, Naomi Langford-Wood from Edgewise. I've just flown back from Dublin too because I've been at the Economics Festival in Kilkenny. I love Ireland. But I just wondered, with hindsight now, do you think that the UK government and the Irish government should have done an Iceland on the banks?
No, we've taken a very different route. We had a number of banks that we had to make serious structural changes. We've now got two pillar banks. We had a lot of discussions at European Council level and with the ECB. Obviously, the monies that my government committed to recapitalising our banks we believe all of that can be recovered in full and possibly even greater to the people's benefit. But unfortunately, what happened in respect of one bank has been lost. Clearly, our economic situation is much stronger than it was previously. We're in a very much better place. So the people put up with a lot of sacrifice, made a lot of very difficult choices in their own personal lives. But I think we're now beginning to see the benefits of a recovering economy, and our challenge is to secure that recovery for the future and make sure that it's felt throughout the region so that every family can benefit. Yep.
Teacher,
Sure.
my name is Peter Chapman from Clutton's International Property Consultants. I just want to ask you a question. Our Prime Minister made reference to the plight of the UK steel industry this morning, and clearly there is unfair competition coming in from Belarus and China. The current situation regarding the European state aid relief is capped at €300,000. In view of the current position, would you support the UK government in trying to raise that level?
Well, clearly competitiveness is part and parcel of where we are agreed we have to be. The negotiations that will take place around that obviously are one for the European Commission to consider. But if all things are equal and competitiveness is our key, there's no reason why that matter can't be debated at some length and in some detail. Obviously, I wouldn't have the details of what the British steel industry is now having to face here. But the European Commission themselves have a process by which they labour, sometimes unduly long, on the basis of state aid being approved and the level to which that might apply. I think it's a matter for Britain, in the case of dealing with the Commission, to set out its case. Sure.
Taoiseach, thanks very much. Wilfred Frost from CNBC. You said you intend to be supportive and sympathetic towards the Prime Minister's terms that he sets out tomorrow in terms of his renegotiation. However, when you consider your fellow Eurozone and European Union members, who do you think is going to be the most resistant to dealing with those terms? And do you fear that one or two members might potentially scupper that renegotiation and lead to an outcome where Britain therefore leaves the European Union, an outcome, of course, which you don't wish to see?
Well, obviously, everybody supports the elimination of red tape and useless administration. Everybody supports a single market. Everybody supports the single digital market. Everybody supports competitiveness. Everybody supports growth, prosperity and jobs. Why wouldn't they? On the other issues of ever closer union, on the question of migration, and the question of welfare reform, these are matters that I assume the Prime Minister will set out in some greater detail tomorrow in his letter. So, having worked with him for the last number of years, I would say that the majority of European partners would look at the future in terms of how effective how you can reform the union to work more effectively. Does any Prime Minister feel that it's in their interest to have 50% rate of unemployment among young people, or the high rates that apply generally in some countries, when we know we can be better by having more competence and effective running of the country, of the individual countries? So I'm not going to comment on who might take a particular point of view. Clearly, when this process started, Prime Minister set out his stall in general terms, and subsequent to that, he travelled to all the European leaders, the vast majority of them, and discussed with them individually what his views were. Following that, there was a series of discussions about the technical issues, and now he's going to write to President Tusk and Juncker, setting out with greater clarity what it is that he believes should apply in the case of a more effective reform. So, from what I know at the moment, we would be both supportive and constructive. But obviously, every country's got its own national interests. In that sense, though, what I want to see is that the union, is run as effectively as can be in the interest of the peoples of the countries of the union. And that when we look outside the European Union, the potential that is there for further trade and therefore further jobs and prosperity and ambitions and careers for millions of people is clearly up in front of us. So let's see what the December meeting brings. And as I said, I'd be generally supportive and constructive in support of Britain here, as clearly a number of other countries already are. But they're entitled to wait and see what the detail that will emerge tomorrow will be. Yes?
Andrew Fraser, Mitsubishi Corporation. Your government plays host to a set of corporation tax arrangements for multinationals, which in many instances have led to some very artificial and highly aggressive schemes whereby those multinationals are not paying their tax in the countries where essentially they're doing business within the union. Do you look forward to working constructively with your partners in the union to remove some of those distortions, or do you want to continue to enjoy the party while it lasts?
Thanks very much. Would say this. Our corporate tax rate is 12.5%, has been so for very many years, applies across all sectors, is utterly transparent and accountable, and is set down in law. We're the only English-speaking country in the Eurozone. Obviously, we've got a highly flexible education system, which is capable of meeting the challenges of the next wave, wherever it comes from. In regard to multinationals, we have so many in the country employing over 100,000 people, but it's not a one-way street. Huge investment from the United States, obviously, for very many years. So in regard to the issue of the corporate tax rates, we've been very conscious about this. And so we eliminated the stateless concept 2 years ago in the budget. Last year we got rid of the double Irish, which was causing reputational damage to the country. We have participated fully and as a leading member in terms of the BEPS report from the OECD. And we are actually the first country now to comply fully in having a knowledge box set at half the corporate tax rate of 6.25%, fully compliant with the OECD. So, as I say, our corporate tax rate has been set in law, has been there for very many years, and in order to deal with any concept of reputational damage, we have eliminated those issues of the stateless concept and the double Irish. So we're out front saying this is what applies in Ireland across all sectors, across the entire country, and we're adding to that now in terms of being competitive but being fair, in the sense of having a knowledge box introduced in the recent budget, which would apply for the future. So clearly the European Commission have already given judgments in respect of 2 companies, and are now and decided early this year, to look at all countries, and will make their judgments. But we're very happy that we defend our position very strongly, enshrined in law, transparent and accountable across all sectors. 3.
Roger Kendrick. You've presented 2 arguments this morning. One is that we need to be part of the European Union, which is really all about standardization and harmonization and regulation. But in answer to an earlier question, you said that everybody's in favor of lower regulation and more competitiveness. Isn't the truth of the matter that the euro area is growing slowly? It's only 20% of world trade and it's declining. We're reaching a point where we would all be better off, UK and Ireland, outside the EU and free to make our own regulations and compete effectively.
Well, I said the question is one eventually to be answered by the British people. And in order for them to give an answer, they've got to have all the relevant information so that they can make their decision. In Ireland, we've had votes on referenda over the last 30 years, Maastricht and Nice and so on like that. So people understand the concepts of the Parliament, the Commission, and the Council. It's not so much about having low regulations, but having effective regulation. I mean, what do you want in Britain? You want the same as everybody else, where families and people can have the opportunity to go to work, to be well paid for that work, to see that work actually pays, and can set out on their own personal journeys for their families and their children and their futures. And that can apply, in my view. But Europe and the Union and the Eurozone have got to focus on how they can do things better. As I say, when you look at the figures that apply in some countries, no Prime Minister could be happy with that. And you've got to change to change the competency and the way of working effectively to make those kinds of changes. So it's not just about having low regulations, it's about running the place effectively. We've got 500 million people here. So it's an enormous market with enormous potential. I believe, actually, that the TTIP arrangements, if they can be concluded, will bring a couple of million jobs extra on either side of the Atlantic, but also set down the conditions for world trade. Now, clearly, the Union and countries within the Union are looking outside at the burgeoning populations in the Far East and the potential that that holds also. But here we are with two of the greatest developed blocs on the planet in the United States and the European Union. We could, can, and will do so much better.
Taoiseach, I think that's the point at which we'll have to leave it. Colleagues, to have the head of government of our close neighbour, and if I may, Taoiseach, even more importantly, our close friend, address our conference is a very great privilege and honour. And your thoughts on the issue of the day, Britain's role in the European Union, are timely, apposite and much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a great CBI thank you to Enda Kenny.